Hey everyone. As a developer, you understand the importance of keeping your audience engaged. You know this because engagement leads to future opportunities for conversions with your customers. You may have asked yourself, with an app that you've published, could I have made a change in my app that could result in increased conversions? For example, if you have an app that is ad supported, you might ask yourself, could I change the placement of ads in my app in a way that could result in more ad clicks? A/B testing provides a way for you to test this hypothesis and many other hypotheses with low friction. Hi, my name is Jason Watson, and I'm a program manager on the Windows Dev Center team at Microsoft, and I work on developer services such as A/B testing. A/B testing provides you with the tools to experiment with variations of your app with your audience. You can use A/B testing to determine which versions of your app can perform the best with your customers. In other words, net the most conversions. You can use A/B testing to test things like descriptions for in-app offers in your app, placements of ad, the sign-up experience, user flow, game settings such as level difficulty and spawn rates. You can also use A/B testing then to make data-driven decisions about which variations of your app that you ship to your entire audience. Let's walk through an example. Let's say that you have an app, a Photos app, with an option to disable ads. And maybe your conversion rate today is 9%, but you would like to boost that to something much greater than 9%. So you might ask yourself the question, what if I changed the text description for the in-app purchase offer? In this case, let's change it from disable ads to disable ads now. Could that possibly net me significantly more conversions with my audience? With A/B testing, you can ship 2 app experiences with a single app to your audience. Let's say that we have A/B testing enabled in your app, and through A/B testing, we can present an offer to your customers that says disable ads or disable ads forever. And from Windows Dev Center, you can split your audience's view of which offer that they see. And so in this case, you can see that half of your users of this app will see disable ads, and half will see disable ads forever. Now, the first audience that sees the disable ads offer is netting you an 11% conversion rate. Now, this conversion rate is roughly on par with what you saw before, which was 9%. And so that's expected because the experience is the same. For the audience, basically half of your users that are seeing the variation B experience, which basically is where the offer is disable ads forever, you're seeing a 45% conversion rate. Clearly, this is the winning variation. From Windows Dev Center, you can, in 2 clicks, switch your entire audience to variation B. And you can do this without having to rewrite your code or republish your app. You can make this work for your apps by updating your code to integrate A/B testing. The way you do this is by adding a reference to the new Microsoft Store Engagement and Monetization SDK. When you integrate this SDK with your app, you also instrument your program variables to receive settings from the A/B testing service. You also instrument your app to create logging events that will send back to the A/B testing service information on when users have viewed your experiment and when users have converted. A conversion is basically a successful outcome that you define. For instance, an ad click could be a conversion, or an in-app purchase could be a conversion. Once you've instrumented your app for A/B testing, you can then use Windows Dev Center to create experiments and to run experiments and to complete experiments. And finally, you can use Windows Dev Center to switch your users to a completely new app behavior as a result of an experiment that you ran. Let's walk through a quick demo of how you can instrument your app code to support A/B testing. Let's say that you have an app that has a button that you would like to optimize clicks for. In this case, there's a button that says click here, and it's gray, and it's really big. And what you would like to do is optimize clicks for that button. You can make a hypothesis that maybe if you change the text on the button and change the color of the button, that will improve the number of clicks. So this app has already been instrumented with A/B testing. Let's go ahead and look at the code. In my app, I include the new namespace Microsoft.services.store.engagement. And I include some initialization code to connect the app with the A/B testing service. The app is also instrumented with an API key that comes from Windows Dev Center. This API key enables the app to authenticate itself against the A/B testing service. In this app, there's also code to retrieve a variation from the A/B testing service. When the app receives a variation assignment, the app also checks the currency of the variation. In other words, it checks whether the variation needs to be refreshed from the service. And if the app needs to refresh the variation, we'll call a method called refreshVariationAsync. And finally, the app stores the variation in a particular variable. That variable is a dictionary object, and the app will query that dictionary object for the settings it needs to perform the appropriate behavior. In this case, the app will query the variation for assignments for the button text and also the RGB color values for the button. Your last step in instrumenting the app for A/B testing is to create log events. In this app, we have one log event called userViewedButton. This event gets logged with the A/B testing service when the app knows that the user has viewed the button. The app also logs a conversion event that's called userClickButton. This is the event that will inform the A/B testing service when a user has performed the desired action. And in this case, the action we're trying to optimize is clicks of the button. Let's go ahead and look at an experiment that's been set up for this particular app. The app is called Button Click Demo App, and underneath Services is an experimentation module. And you can see that I have a draft experiment already set up for this particular app. There are no active experiments currently, and here's a list of the completed experiments from the past. Let's click on the draft experiment. And you can see that this experiment was set up with the API key, the same API key that has been integrated in my app. The name of the experiment is Increase Button Clicks, and this gives the developer understanding, a high-level understanding of what the intent is for this experiment. Notice that the Test Experiment button is checked. What this enables a developer to do is to edit experiments that are marked as test while they are actually active. Editing active experiments is only possible with test experiments. For production experiments, we don't allow experiments to be edited in flight, and that's to ensure that the results are relevant. As part of the experiment definition is the view event name. So the user viewed button is the name of the event that will log whenever a user has viewed the button in the app. In the goal and conversion events section, you can specify many goals for your experiment. For this particular experiment, we'll state a single goal, and that is to maximize button clicks. And in this goal, we're going to measure success through the user click button conversion event. And our goal is to maximize these conversions. And finally, as part of the experiment definition, you can specify different variations you want to be able to assign to users of your app, the distribution assignment for each variation, and also the settings that correspond to each variation. In this case, this experiment has two variations assigned, gray button and orange button. If you click on Distribute Equally, that will ensure that the distribution for each variation is equal, and therefore It's a completely random assignment. It's a 50-50 assignment of variation to your audience when this experiment launches. So there's a 50-50 chance that a user could get the gray button versus the orange button for this experiment. There are 4 settings that correspond to each variation. For the gray button variation, the button text setting is set to click here. And this determines the text that gets displayed on the button of the app. And then the RGB values are all set to 128. And so an app that receives this variation will basically paint a gray button. For the orange button variation, the button text is click me now. And so if an app is launched with this particular variation, then the button will say click me now. But the RGB color values are different. They're 255, 128, and 1. And so again, if an app receives this variation, they'll see an orange button instead. Let's go ahead and save and activate this experiment. So the experiment is active now. If I scroll down, you can see that the variation and settings section is still editable, and so I can change the parameters of this experiment mid-flight. You should also see that the distribution is 50-50, and so there's a 50-50 chance that my app will see the gray button or the orange button as an assignment. Let's go ahead and run the app. Okay, so you can see that the app has basically received the orange button assignment. Now, this app will continue to receive this assignment for the duration of the experiment. But this is a test experiment, and so because this is a test experiment, I have the ability to edit the experiment in flight. And so in this case, for testing purposes, I'm going to force the gray button variation by changing the distribution such that 100% of my audience will get the gray button and 0% of my audience will get the orange button assignment. So I'll update my experiment. And then I will relaunch my app. And as you can see, the app has received the gray button assignment and exhibits the appropriate behavior. Testing experiments in flight gives me the ability to preview the different app variations that I want to experiment with my audience. For the next demo, let's look at a different app that has already been running for several weeks. And let's see how you can use the A/B testing portal on Windows Dev Center to act on actual test results. This is the Contoso Photos app. It's a sample app that has an option to disable ads. This app has already been instrumented for A/B testing and has actually recently participated in an experiment. So let's go ahead and take a look at that experiment from Dev Center. This is a completed experiment, and you can see that in the high-level results, the control variation received 19.21% conversion rate. Whereas we measured that the second variation received a 26.66% conversion rate, which is actually about a 40% improvement over the control variation. And yet, I accidentally switched all my customers to the control variation. And so I've ended the experiment, but I switched them to the least successful variation. So we're going to fix that in a bit. If you look at the results details, you can see the raw data that was used to calculate the conversion percentages. And you can also see in this table the statistical significance of the results for the experiment. In this case, this experiment has been running for about 2 weeks. You can see that there were about 10,000 views all up for the experiment, and roughly half of those views were from control, and the other half were from variation B assigned group of users. You can review the experiment details for this experiment. Notice that this experiment used a production API key instead of a test API key. Using a separate API key for production versus test enables you to segregate experiments that are intended for local testers versus experiments that are supposed to be with your real users in production. This experiment was not marked as a test experiment, and so when you look at the variation and settings section, you can see that the fields are grayed out. And notice that in this experiment, there was only one setting that was being experimented on, and that's the disable add string setting. And for control, the add string setting was disable ads, and for variation B, the string setting was disable ads forever. Now let's fix the problem of having switched all of our customers to variation control, because clearly that was not the winning variation. So this experiment has already been completed. What we can do is navigate to the experiment dashboard. Underneath completed experiments, we can clone this experiment. And we'll keep all of the details of the experiment the same, except we're going to make one change. We're actually going to change the distribution from being split to 100% variation B, and no assignments for the control group. We'll go ahead and save and then activate. And then we're going to rerun the app and see what behavior it exhibits. And so now, when I relaunch the app, you can see that the disable ads offer is now changed to disable ads forever. And that was the behavior of the winning variation. And now my entire user audience has been switched to the successful winning variation. The experiment is still active, so I need to complete the experiment. And to make this change, I'll click on the switch button, and this will switch all of my audience to variation B. And as it so happens, they are already on variation B. This will also end the experiment. And now you can see that we've switched all of our customers to variation B. A/B testing can give you several advantages for helping you to be more successful as a developer. One of the advantages that A/B testing provides you with is the ability to experiment with your audience using one code base. You have the ability through A/B testing to identify variations of your app that can net you greater returns from your customers. And finally, with A/B testing, you have the ability in 2 clicks from Windows Dev Center to switch your entire audience to a single winning variation. Again, without rewriting code or without having to republish your app. There are some best practices you should take when running experiments with your audience. One of the best practices is to always try to maximize the sample size of your population. There are some approaches that can help you to accomplish this. One of the approaches is to run split distributions for variation assignments in your experiments. So for example, if you have 2 variations in your experiment, running a 50-50 split for the distribution to your users. Another best practice you can incorporate is by limiting your experiment to 2 variations. The A/B testing service provides support for up to 5 variations, but if you limit your experiments to 2 variations, you're more likely to get to actionable results sooner. You should also run your experiments for at least 2 weeks. Do peek at your data from an experiment at least 1 day after you've started the experiment, but after that 1 day, don't peek. You should look at your results after 1 day running an experiment in case you're seeing very strange or catastrophic results to your conversions as a result of your experiment. You want to make sure that you haven't done something in your experiment that might hurt your revenue with your audience. And so do peek 1 day after running an experiment. But after that first day, if the experiment seems to be going well, you should set it and forget it. Walk away from the experiment and don't peek for at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks. And the reason for that is that the experiment results, they don't really trend. You really need to wait to have a sufficient amount of data before you can act on any results from an experiment. And so if you peek at data too early, you run the risk of making an action with your user base that is not really the right decision or based on the right set of data. And finally, another reason why you should run an experiment for at least 2 weeks is to rule out effects of time of day. You don't want data from the experiment to be skewed based on a particular time of day where user behaviors or habits might change. We encourage you to learn more about the A/B testing and how it can help you as a developer to improve your success by clicking on the experimentation module on the Windows Dev Center site. We also encourage you to download a new SDK, the Microsoft Store Engagement and Monetization SDK, that provides access to the A/B testing features to your app by following the link on the slide. Thank you for your time, and we hope this has been valuable for you.